Please fasten your seatbelts and return your tray tables to their full and upright lock position. We're about to go on a travel wish list.
Ooh, that sounds exciting. Hi, this is Karen from San Francisco.
And this is Alex from Los Angeles, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We're two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies.
All right, so you already teed this up, Alex, which is we're talking about travel. And,
Yep.
part of it is because summer is around the corner. So everybody is making travel plans. Memorial Day kind of kicked off travel for a whole bunch of people. But I guess for me, as somebody who grew up as an army brat, which I think a lot of listeners might know since I've mentioned it before, we kind of were on the go always. So I think that bug of traveling, exploring new cultures, learning from it has sort of always been a part of my life, which I'm just so grateful for. And, the list of places that I want to go and visit just never ends. Pre-COVID, I was actually doing really well. I had this goal of visiting 2 to 3 countries and 2 to 3 cities in a year in the US. And I was doing pretty well, I would say. But of course, all those goals have been totally shot the last few years. So trying to get back to all of that. But really, this topic, the way we were thinking about this was movies that I've shaped our travel wish list. So essentially places that we haven't traveled to yet and how these movies have made me at least want to go visit these places. It was a fun list to prepare. I'm very excited to hear about how you thought about this as well.
Yeah. No, it's that's actually cool. You have an actual travel, or used to have an actual travel list. That's pretty cool.
I mean, in my head, not so much written down.
That counts. Well, I've never gotten to that level of having an actual list. That's pretty cool. But I have a lot of places that I still want to go. And in terms of how I thought about this episode, it was not only thinking about the places that I want to go because movies made me want to go there, but thinking about, okay, why do movies make you want to go places, right? Like in the old days of movies, like before we were born, movies were seen a lot of as a travel log of showing you places you could maybe never go. And the only way you could experience it is through the movies. Obviously now it's much easier with plane travel. You can, cost permitting, go kind of basically anywhere you want. So I was really thinking about, okay, what types of desires do movies unlock in me that make me want to go to a place? This episode was fun, but it just makes me want to jump on a plane and go to these places. So it's kind of frustrating at the same time. I'm like, oh man, I do really want to go here, but oh well. I wanted to save it for after the podcast. At least that was an excuse of, well, I'm not going here because we have to do the recording, and then I can plan my trip immediately to all 6 of these destinations. So
yeah, I know. Yeah, I agree. I feel similarly about how I thought about things too. I was also thinking maybe after I had watched the movie and put my list together of this whole thing of who are you as a traveler? Because when you're traveling, are you there just for pure amusement? Are you there to learn? Are you there to take advantage of what the place has to offer or the people have to offer? Are you there to contribute? Are you just a passerby, or are you looking to find a new home, or something takes you by surprise? So that's the thing about travel, right? Like you never know what's going to happen. So I think there's a little bit of that sprinkled in my list as well, in addition to just the places that I want to visit.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And actually, I should then remind listeners who might be new to our podcast that we actually did an episode, that was episode 16, all about our love of travel and these desires and how movies have unlocked that or reminded us of specific trips, et cetera. I mean, I don't want to talk about the whole episode because you can go back into our feed and listen to it right now. But I think that's those things definitely did shape a lot of what I was thinking about today as well. But, had to look at things or places I haven't been, as opposed to that other list. It was a lot of reminding me of places that I had been.
You ready to fasten your seatbelts?
Let's do it. Okay, so then we will be hopping a plane to Miami because my first movie, which is the number 3 movie that shaped my travel wish list, is Bad Boys from 1995. This is a film directed by Michael Bay, starring Will Smith, Martin Lawrence, and Téa Leoni. The IMDb plot summary: 2 hip detectives protect a witness to a murder while investigating a case of stolen heroin from the evidence storage room from their police precinct. So I'll talk a little bit about why this movie, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on the film. We can dive more to the film. So this movie, to me, like Miami was a place actually I never thought really much about growing up. And I saw this movie for the first time in high school on VHS and immediately just made this city seem cool to me and how it was depicted, and Michael Bay's photography, the hues, the warm hues that it had, the sunsets, the amazing skyline and how it's shot. I'm a big fan of city skylines. So the skyline looks cool. I'm like, I got to go there because I want to see that in person. And I never really would thought of Miami skylines, honestly, at all until I saw this movie, and that there's that cool like blue and white striped building that's kind of sticking up there. So that was sort of the genesis of my love for, or desire, I should say, of wanting to go to Miami, solely based on this film. And I can get into that more and more into the film, but I'm curious about your, well, first of all, have you been to Miami? And second of all, have you seen the film?
No and no.
Oh.
So yeah, no, I was wondering about that. Like, what made you want to go to Miami after watching this movie? Because my impression was that you don't really see much of the city except for the skyline. You're mostly inside. But now that you say the skyline, yeah, that was pretty amazing. The movie opens with that, and amazing sunsets kind of sprinkled all across the movie. So yeah, it was really fun to see. And over the years, yeah, Miami is definitely on that list of places that I want to visit in the US for sure, because of it has a very sort of distinct party culture, but I wouldn't equate it to, other typical beachy party places either. It just feels really unique. And I guess to that point, not that I know what a Miami attitude would look like, but there's something about Will Smith's character and his flashiness, but also, there's like a smirkiness, but he's also a good-hearted guy overall. Like, I sort of think of that vibe when I think of Miami, right or wrong. So they captured that. Obviously, it's hard to distill, a place's vibe to like a single sentence because there are all sorts of people everywhere, of course. But yeah, there's sort of this effortless coolness with a lot of exaggeration. I know I said two opposite words in one sentence, but maybe that's what Miami is in my head.
Yeah, it always seemed, again, if folks are listening from Miami or been to Miami, maybe we're totally wrong. We're just judging what we've seen in films or documentaries about. But Miami, especially after seeing this movie as a high school student, it seemed kind of big to me. And just there's a lot of, they show the nightclubs, and there's like a fun vibe there. There's a lot of fast cars. There's some car chasing. Will Smith's got that nice Porsche. There is that attitude that he has. There's the nice suits that he wears. All these sort of things definitely do, to me, capture what I think Miami's like and make me want to go there. The architecture too is really cool. There's a lot of, Michael Bay, again, is just a very visual filmmaker who was one of my favorite directors back in the early days of his career, though now with Transformers, he's kind of gone off my list. But the way that he shoots even just cars or buildings, or a lot of low angle shots of some of these interior, even apartments, but they're very cool and designed. And that to me, just always like, whoa, Miami's like really on the cutting edge of fashion and coolness and all these things that to me just made me like really want to go there. Even from that opening shot, which there's a Miami sign that sort of looks like the Hollywood sign with a plane flying over it, doesn't exist. They made that up for the movie, unfortunately. But yeah, that's not a real thing. But I'm like, whoa, that looks so cool. Like I want to go to this sign, but then realized, unfortunately, that it did not exist. To get into the movie a little bit too, I think it's actually tying into the city a bit as well. Like this movie, or most cop movies, I feel like, are New York, LA. Miami's not usually a place you find a buddy cop movie to be set. And I think they really take advantage of that fact in this film, not only with the locations, but I think too with the lead actors and the tone of it. Being in Miami just makes this feel different and cool for some reason, that if it was set in LA or New York, it just would feel a little bit more, I don't know, by the books and kind of substandard, because the actual premise of buddy cops and the little twist they have in this film too, where Martin Lawrence has to impersonate Will Smith's character for The Witness, that's something we've seen in a ton of different movies. Actually, this movie was originally supposed to be set in New York until they brought on Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. It was supposed to be Dana Carvey and John Lovitz. Very different film would have been. But they both add a lot of spice and verve to this film, and I still love it to this day. I think it's hilarious. I think the action is great, and it's really incredible to see these two stars who at the time were both just TV stars. Like Will hadn't been in a movie this big before. He'd been in like one movie, I think a small drama. Martin Lawrence hadn't exploded yet. Michael Bay, this was his first film. And you can feel there's like this energy of everyone involved in this movie is about to own the Hollywood for the next 5-6 years, which happened with all three of them. But this was just when they were peaking. And there's that energy to this film that I associate just with Miami now too, of like, oh, this is like a place that's so vibrant and energetic just because of what Michael and Will and Martin Lawrence do in this.
That's awesome. Actually, that context is very helpful because it's, we find this on this podcast all the time. It all comes down to when you watch a movie, and I'd never seen this movie before. So watching it now, it sort of feels like, yeah, this is kind of a template that's been used so many times. I do agree that the Miami thing sort of separates it. In fact, I wanted more of that, I wanted to see the city. I wanted to see local people. I wanted to be outside because I associate Miami with the beach and, people eating out and kind of these open air restaurants and such. Like I wanted to see more of that life. That said, the attitude is captured. But the thing about these people exploding, that's a really good point. I didn't think about that actually when I was watching the movie, because I just take Will Smith, minus slap stuff as a bona fide movie star.
Right.
Versus hearing that was kind of a jumping off point, and then remembering how amazing he is, how charismatic he is, all of that, like that's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah, he really does. I mean, I still watch this movie maybe like once a year, but his whole like persona just, I mean, it's Will Smith, right? I mean, what more can you say? Again, slap aside.
This is how we understand Will Smith.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this was created for this movie or he just lent his own persona to the movie. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't really actually watch the TV show he was on, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I never saw that as a kid, but I imagine he a similar kind of attitude. But it just seemed like everyone in this movie, including Michael Bay too, was like in it to prove that they like were the guys that could do something like this. Because no one who was involved in this film, or I shouldn't say no one, but the two main actors and Michael Bay had never made a movie on this scale, or Michael had never made a movie at all. And again, he's someone who I loved him back in the day. We already covered The Rock on this podcast, one of my favorite movies of all time. And this one too, just he has this great like Michael Bay eye of the camera's always moving. It's pulling in, it's pulling out, it's swinging around. There's that famous Bad Boy shot where the two of them kind of stand up and the camera is like 360 revolving around them. That's like associated with this film now. And that kind of stuff to me just feels still new to this day and kind of electric. And which is why I was so into Michael Bay for the first, I guess, 2 films of his career. And then very quickly I was like, I don't know about this stuff anymore. But in the beginning, it seemed, like some kind of energy and like he's about to be a star that's born. And again, I just now associate that with Miami. And that's why I want to go there. I want to go there.
That's awesome.
Okay, yeah, let's jump to our next destination. So after Miami, where are we going, Karan?
We are going to a bunch of places, but the movie that's my number 3 that shaped my list, my travel list, is Eat, Pray, Love from 2010, directed by Ryan Murphy, starring Julia Roberts, Javier Bardem, Richard Jenkins, Billy Crudup. Quick logline: a married woman realizes how unhappy her marriage really is, and that her life needs to go in a different direction. After a painful divorce, she takes off on a round-the-world journey to find herself. So, like you mentioned, every list on my movie has like a certain feeling that I associate with travel and what pulls me into traveling. For me, this is, even though this movie, if listeners don't know, the Eat, Pray, Love basically is Italy, that's eat, love, pray is India, and then love is Bali. For me, this is on my list for the Bali part, even though I guess I've been to Italy and I grew up in India.
I was going to say, you've been to India? I didn't know
that. So this is really for the Bali part. And with that part, to me, this is about travel being a way to relax, rejuvenate, self-reflect. I'd never really seen Bali on the screen until this movie. And it still kind of feels very relevant to me, even though I'm sure Bali, since this movie has become a lot more commercialized, and it's probably hard to find those pristine kind of rice paddy fields and with, Julia on a bicycle and what have you. But this is why this movie is on here, of that feeling of serenity, finding yourself a little bit, but really more about the quiet reflection that you can get when you travel. And in my mind, Bali represents that. So, but yeah, curious if you had watched this movie before, and have you been to any of these places? I know you've been to 2.
Yes, it's I have, similar to you, I've been to Italy a couple times and to India a couple times as well. One of the times with yourself, which was really fun. Have you show me around? Hope to go back to both of those places. And no, I've never been to Bali before, and also have always wanted to go there, and had not seen this film before until the podcast.
Oh, wow. So I guess I can go maybe a little bit into why this movie and
Yeah.
what about kind of Bali it captures, and I guess in general as well. The movie sort of starts in Bali, like she, as in Julia Roberts, she meets this kind of medicine man person who has this prophecy and says that you lose everything and you'll come to Bali and then you'll find a new life, and that's
Mhm.
sort of what ends up happening. I don't know how real this is because this is based on the life of the person who wrote this book. Maybe it is all true, but I don't know. There is something cool about that kind of, you know, cosmic sort of
Like a prophecy. Yeah.
prophecy thing
Right.
that might happen. And it may not be so blatant, but there's something cool about meeting somebody who's very different from you in a foreign place that feels kind of incredible and says something, and that changes your life. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
a bold prophecy, but it just changes how the way you think about life, you know. And
Right.
that has happened to me, maybe in not such a big profound way, but in little ways. So I think I really connect with that part. And then Bali is shot beautifully, and that whole sequence of leisure life and these, you know, glam huts that they all live in, and all of that, you know, is very beautifully captured. As a movie, though, I mean, this is not a great movie, I would say that. Like, I think it drags quite a bit. Julia's performance overall, even though I like her a lot,
Mhm.
I would say more than you do, as we've said on the podcast before. There's something, I don't know, very dry and stagey about her performance to me in this in parts. That said, what the movie does do well at is in my mind, it does capture the essence of these three places. I've not been to Bali,
Mm.
so I don't know, but the
Mhm.
other two places, it does capture the style and sexiness of Rome and the food and all of that, and then the chaotic yet peaceful
Mm.
energy of India. So I think that part is done pretty well, but the movie meanders quite a bit. If I'm being honest, my favorite part of the movie is the Italy part
Yeah, me
because I
too.
think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
And and that's the thing, right? Like, so much of travel is made by the people you meet. And I
Mhm.
think the connections that we see in the Italy part are the best versus the Javier Bardem romance and what have you in Bali sort of doesn't quite land in my mind and drags quite a bit.
Yeah, I had like I said, I'd never seen this film before. I'm a huge Ryan Murphy fan.
I know I'm
I
not that
watch
either. So
all of his
there's,
TV shows. I
yeah,
think he's one of the best TV producers, writers out there. And this had always been a kind of curio for me because he wrote and directed it, and it was a big hit commercially. And just my aversion to Julia Roberts. And it was funny actually because I had kind of an aversion to this attitude of a very kind of selfish middle class to upper class rich kind of like white woman attitude that has, you know, something to take definitely captured the zeitgeist for a while. And I think a lot of the things that I'd heard about just about the real author kind of turned me off. Though I'm curious to see Coyote Ugly, which is another movie based on her life the before this. I always wanted to see that.
that's really fun, I would
Yeah,
say.
I want to see that movie. I love Paper Caribou. So and Julie Roberts being this main character, I was kind of in a way sort of predisposed to dislike this woman. And I didn't hate her as much as I thought I was going to. Actually, I sort of felt that she was sympathetic and I did feel for her,
Yeah.
even though it was a very selfish journey that she was on. I do feel that just because you are coming out of some situation that's a little more cushy than it might be for the rest of us out there, that doesn't mean that these people, rich people don't go through problems.
No.
Especially in the fact that in the film they aged this woman up about 15 years. I think if they had stuck more to the real story, it would have been a lot harder to relate to a 30-year-old who's now able to just take a year off, get paid by a book publisher to go around and quote unquote discover herself for a book, which is what actually happened. They didn't really get into that in the film. And I think actually having Julia Roberts be older makes a little bit more sense. So surprisingly, I didn't have much of an aversion to her as a character as I thought. And it really did. The Italy part was great. I thought that
Mm-hmm.
not only captured the cities in Italy that I've been to that they captured in the film, but it showed her like meeting people from the place and trying to, even if it was a little bit like bumper sticker for sort of what Italy is, I didn't
Right.
feel it was like offensive or something. It was, she was kind of getting out there and meeting the people. I just thought it was odd in both the India and the Bali sequences. She sort of stayed away from locals, especially in the India. It was more like talking to other tourists. You didn't really get a sense of the Indian
I
culture as
mean,
much,
the
and same
Indian
thing in
girl
Bali.
is there, and but it's sort of true though, because when you're at an ashram, you're
Right, right.
probably going to interact with the people over there. So it was very curated in that
Mm-hmm.
sense,
Yeah.
which to me is actually fine because India is so huge and complicated and complex that I don't know how you would ground the story if she was just all about herself roaming around. So
Hmm.
in a way, they sort of contained it. But yeah, I see what you're saying though.
Yeah, it's like in Bali too. That turns into more of like a romance where like I don't really get a sense of Bali as much as okay, now I get it if I had like 10 grand to spend on a vacation in Bali, but I don't know what else beyond that it would be like. Though I will say Javier Bardem was so incredibly attractive in this
Oh,
movie.
he looks great.
Like I was like, oh my God, like have you always been this hot?
Yeah,
I mean, I
he's
don't think I've ever seen him this attractive at anything. I'm so used to him being these odd, sort of like in Bond or No Country for Old Men, who's got dumb
right.
haircuts and weird accents. He was just so attractive in this movie. I just and they had a nice little meet cute moment of him almost running her over on a bike. The movie definitely like started off kind of annoying in New York. I liked the Rome part a lot, and then it just was like gradually kind of lost interest and quality to me over time. It just became more and more kind of annoying, and the pace was really slow. So I agree with you; it was like probably a half an hour too long. But yeah, I didn't dislike. I kind of went into it being ready to dislike her and the character, and not that I came off loving her, really empathizing with her a lot, but it wasn't some kind of revulsion to her. Though I will say it was very odd, like in the beginning, especially in the New York scenes, like the cinematography was so weird with like the lighting. And then I was like, who
Very
is this
weird.
DP? And oh, it's this DP that I really like, Robert Richardson, who does all the Oliver Stone films and did some Quentin Tarantino movies. And I'm like, I love his style there, but here it just was so odd. It looked
Very odd. And
I don't
even
know why they
Rome is
chose him.
just lit in such a weird way.
Yeah.
Like the sunlight. I mean, I know they're going for like the yellow sunlight kind of look, but it's too
Hmm.
much. And this is why, like, I'm not a big Ryan Murphy fan, as you know.
Right.
This material in somebody else's hands who is a little bit more sensitive and less camp, I think
Hmm.
would be a lot deeper and more even. And the
Hmm.
reason why this feels very uneven is because Ryan Murphy to me is all about camp. And there's no
Right. Right.
camp in this,
Right.
it's like the wrong material, I think, for this director.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that said, though, I still have always enjoyed this movie
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
moments. It's very rewatchable. Like you can pick a section and watch it, particularly the Italy section.
Yes.
I've watched like a million times because it's just so fun.
And it does really remind me. It makes me want to go back
Yeah.
to Italy for sure. I think they did. Again, that was
Yeah.
sort of the part of the film I think had the most life to it. And I sort of
Yeah.
again attribute it to be more than just Julia. There's a lot of other people there, and that she kind of becomes more of the center of the film as the other go on to the other two locations. But yeah, I'm glad I finally was able to check this off my list. I'm probably not going to read the book anytime soon, or care
No.
about the author. But I am interested in Coyote Ugly. I want to check that one out.
That is a good movie. I will say though, this thing of taking a journey to find yourself, however big, however small, that is something that I always have connected with. And I think
Hmm.
travel is a very good way of doing that. No matter what privilege you have or no, I think as somebody who's traveled his whole life,
Mm-hmm.
I really value that, that if you can do this, go do it, I think.
Oh, I agree. I was commenting more on the nature of her trip and her journey just seemed very self-centered. And yeah, there's a place for that sometimes in your life, especially coming
Yeah.
after divorce, is what she did. But I think to me, if you're connecting with other people and kind of having empathy and getting closer to others beyond yourself, that is really the best way to like grow and recover from some situation, even like a divorce. And I just felt she was treating Javier Bardem, especially at the end of the movie, like very yeah, very rudely to try to be like, no, this is about me. Like, I can't let you into my life and have your love for me help me. No, I have to do this all on my own. It's like, no, Julia, like the point I was thinking where this movie would go is like, no, the point is you meet other people and they help you help yourself. And then you can't make it all about yourself and that everything is just about you, which again, I get she was coming after divorce and sometimes you need to focus on yourself a little bit. But to me, travel is something where you're integrating with other people and learning from them, which is why I thought the Italy part was the strongest because I really did feel she was taking a lot of lessons from the local Italians versus in India it was more that other attendee at that shrine who she kind of took some things from him. But even that advice I thought from him was like, I don't know, this is something about it seemed a little too self-centered to me. So that's sort of what I mean, not the travel piece and the
Yeah.
finding yourself part. I think that is what it made the movie work for me when it was that. But then when it kind of distilled down too much into this like yeah, feeling of selfishness that she had throughout the film, that was kind of like, I don't know, like this is just it's
But
Javier Bardem. He's never looked hotter. Just go to him. Like, what are you
just
doing?
go
Get
to
on that
him.
boat and go to that freaking
Well,
island.
I mean, but that's the thing, right? Like everybody is going to be on their own journey, right? And I think everybody has different varying levels of selfishness and also grief that they hold. And it makes sense to me that you wouldn't just go after somebody because you have not dealt with all the things that you have to deal with. In that sense, actually, the story is actually pretty grounded because I think it would be a different movie where everything is worked out. She got all the lessons and life is all hunky dory. It doesn't work that way in real life, actually.
That's true. Yeah, but this is a movie. So I'm curious on how and yes, it is a real story, kind of. I'm sure she embellished stuff even in the novel. Right. But even that part at the end where she sort of her self-fulfillment becomes giving money to these other folks in need in Bali. I just felt like money was the only way that like her lesson was I can use my money to solve other people's problems instead of actually kind of relating. And I even didn't think the advice she gave to that Indian woman who was in that arranged marriage of basically just like suck it up and deal with it. It'll be okay. Like, no, she's not happy. Like she is about to be potentially trapped in a situation that you were just trapped in, a marriage that you didn't like. You're advising her just to like, oh, I had a vision and you were happy, so do it. It's like, what? Like, I thought that was not only bad advice, but just again, sort of taking it where all she could think about is was herself in that moment and what she needed, and not actually what that other girl needed. That's sort of what I was.
I disagree actually, because in the India chapter, she's kind of questioning the choices that she's made to the point of even leaving the marriage, because she actually has been very self-centered the whole time, even though there have been legitimate reasons as to why she walked out of the marriage. So I think what she's telling the girl is that don't sort of let your impulses guide you. Like give things a chance and sort of see what happens, because the truth is she doesn't know actually. And there are moments later where you see the two of them, the bride and the groom, kind of laughing and connecting a little bit. So she's just reacting based on her own idea that, oh, this would actually be horrible and I'll be trapped here. Well, you don't know that. So I think what she's saying is you got to give it a chance. You got to give it a try. And maybe it's not as simple as that, but I understand from the character's point of view. Again, it's not about good advice or bad advice. It makes sense for this character, because with 2 months of travel, you can't suddenly be, turn into a new person who will have like totally different advice. It feels that this is what this character would say.
True. And maybe my judgment is coming in because of the cultural impact of this. Again, I don't want to oversay in movement, but this sort of eat, pray, love ethos was definitely something that popped up in the culture at the end of the last decade that turned into something that I feel was kind of ugly. And maybe that is what I'm kind of to ascribe to this, that this was the genesis in a way of this kind of, self-centered kind of movement that I think was started around that time, especially of people that are in these certain situations. And that's sort of what I was coming into this movie trying to not let that get to me. And sometimes it did. And that's where I'm like judging the sense of like, well, she is not just a character in a movie based on a real person. There is sort of this zeitgeist around this whole eat, pray, love ethos that I just have an aversion to. So that was sort of where I was maybe being more judgmental on her character because of what this kind of became.
To me, that's on those people, right? Like people have to make their own choices and then hold themselves accountable for that.
Fair.
Good or bad. So
yeah, I just would have told her, don't get married. And I would have told Julia, get with Javier Bardem. If I was wandering around either of those places. And if I was in Italy, I'd be like, I want some of that pizza because that looks really good.
Oh, so good. So good. Okay. Where are you taking us next, Alex?
So we're taking off from Bali and flying to Mexico. So my number 2 film that shaped my travel wish list is Apocalypto from 2006. This is a film directed and co-written by Mel Gibson, starring Dalia Hernandez, Raul Max Truello, Gerardo Taracena. And the IMDb plot summary: as the Mayan kingdom faces its decline, a young man is taken on a perilous journey to a world ruled by fear and oppression. So I'll start off like the last one, talking about why this, made my list, because I have been to Mexico several times, but only to Cabo. So I've only been to Cabo and Tijuana. So only like the tourist destination places. And for me, one thing that movies do is it brings history to life for me. I'm a big fan of history, been since I was a kid, and movies have inspired me to, when I'm in other places, want to go to the ruins, want to go to where the ancient civilizations were. Like that is a big desire. That one of the reasons why I love Italy so much is because I also love ancient Rome. I've seen Gladiator and Spartacus and want to go to those locations. And this movie for me, when I saw it when it first came out in the theater, for the first time, I saw a Mayan civilization told on the scale of what I would traditionally see in a film set in ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient England, France. There had never been a big budget film made with this culture. And I grew up in the United States. We didn't really study pre-Columbian civilizations, especially in Mexico. We learned a little bit about the Native Americans, but not really. It was all very Eurocentric. So I never even thought about ancient Mayan civilizations, Mexican ruins, until seeing this film. And this film, I think, I have actually a lot of issues with this film, both on the historical accuracy and on the messages of it, but we'll get into that later. But the scale of what it was, you see the pyramids, you see these big civilizations, these were large cities, all these things that now make me really want to go visit, the Yucatan Peninsula, see these Mayan ruins, see the pyramids. So have you been to Mexico? Have you seen these ruins? Have you seen the film?
Well, seen the film obviously for.
Oh, of course. Have you seen the film before?
No, I had not seen the film before.
Okay.
I have been to Mexico and I have seen the pyramids over there, which was amazing.
Oh, cool. I am jealous.
I wish I'd seen the movie before to kind of really draw the connection. Although I'm curious to hear now that you said that the historical accuracy is sort of all over the place, which I guess I'm not surprised by.
Yeah, it's Mel Gibson. He's terrible at that.
And it's a Hollywood movie, so, the bar is not the highest in general for these sort of things.
Yeah.
But no, I've never watched it before, so I was trepidatious at the same time, excited to watch a movie of this scale, like you said, and get a chance to, get into a different culture that in a deeper way that I hadn't.
Yeah. I mean, that was, again, something where I never thought about this culture in that way until this film. And well, first of all, I'll say too, like, I'm not a huge Mel Gibson fan as an actor. And I think as a director, even less so, especially with historical stuff that he's done has been like Braveheart is like woefully inaccurate from a historical standpoint. And again, I'll get into that in this movie a little bit too. But what I think he does so well in this film, which I did really like, and I'll caveat it too, or just mention, I should say, that it is subtitled. So he actually used indigenous actors who were actually Mayan ancestry, and they spoke in ancient Mayan, and it's subtitled, the whole thing. And that lends a sense of authenticity to it that really puts you in this world that I think was, again, really important for me to get excited about this civilization. But I think he also does some great things just in the story, where it starts off the beginning of the film where they're dealing with basically just like a guy who hang around with his bros. They're razzing him about stuff. They're, tricking him into eating like the pig's balls. They're giving him some stuff that's supposed to help with his erectile dysfunction, but instead causes a pain to happen in his nether regions. All stuff that you would see in a movie shot today with like a modern like culture. Oh, there's a wife or a mother-in-law who's complaining about, to the son-in-law about how, she wants grandkids, and, the wife gets woken up by a barking dog and she's like, oh, you got to shut that dog up. These are all things that would happen in a modern society. And I think they do a very good job with the script then of making you relate to these guys, because they're just normal dudes hanging out. It just happens to be ancient, Mayan culture, but you immediately relate. They're wearing very interesting kind of garb, have a lot of piercings and tattoos. They're speaking in an ancient language. It's set hundreds of years ago. So I think they do a very good job with that. And then the movie, too, is a very interesting journey into seeing the different parts of their civilization. It starts out in a little village, but then gets to these giant cities. And again, like, this is my own naivete. I'll admit to that. Like, I didn't really imagine that these Mayan cultures or Aztec cultures as well, because they kind of mix a little bit of the two in this movie, which is one of the problems with it. They had giant cities with like thousands, tens of thousands of people lived in these places. They had markets. They had these amazing architectural technologies. All these things, again, we just don't in the Western or in the United States, at least. I don't know what it was like in India in terms of you learning about these cultures, but that was what we associate with like the Romans, right? That they had all this advanced technology, and you don't really think about the native folks in the Americas that had access to that, but they did. And you see it in this movie, in these giant pyramids, and they knew a lot about science, because as there's a scene where our heroes kind of led up to the top of a pyramid and he's about to be executed, but an eclipse comes in and basically kind of saves him. And there's some great moments between the head priest and what's probably like the chief of the city, where you can kind of tell they're kind of looking at each other like, yeah, we knew this was coming. We were playing into this eclipse, because they were really good at science. they
Right.
knew all this stuff, but they're kind of using that to play into the the power structure that they have there of the rest of the city. So I think that is really cool, and I love the end sequence of the last act of this movie. It's basically just a chase sequence in a jungle, and there's elements of Predator and elements of Rambo, where he's like has to make the jungle work for him against all the people that are chasing him, because the movie is basically one giant chase scene for him to get back to his wife and his kid, which I think is relatable too. So I think on that level the movie really works. Did you find it enjoyable at that level?
I think technically, storytelling wise, like it's actually pretty amazing. You're totally transported, and like you said, it feels relatable, but at the same time harrowing. And it's brilliantly made, performed, acted. It feels real. Like you sort of feel like you're there, which I know is sort of stating the obvious, but you really feel that way in this movie. That said, though, it's a pretty brutal experience to watch this movie. I don't think I'm ever going to watch it again. So it's definitely a brutal experience. So I was very curious, like what has made you go visit these places after, being put in such a brutal experience of watching the movie. But it's clarifying that it's more about the journey through history and time, which this movie does an amazing job at. And I agree. Like I learned a lot about, accurate or not, I learned that ultimately people are people. We care about similar things,
Right.
the things that we want to protect, the things that bother us. And then also a peek into a culture that is not talked about, often ignored, and you sort of walk away with the impression that actually they had a lot going on. But yeah, overall, as a movie, this was a pretty epic experience, and it delivered, I think, what it set out to do.
Yeah, I was surprised when I saw it at the time. I was very intrigued. I saw this when it came out, that even though, again, I didn't like Mel Gibson, but I was like, ancient like Mexican civilization. Like, I'm just curious about this. And I remember really liking it in the theater and seeing it a couple times in the last, 15 years since it came out. And each time I found it, enjoyable. Though, again, that being said, and after I did see it, and you were even saying you kind of assume that this is accurate. And I think that is kind of piggyback on what we were talking about a little bit in our previous episode, which was about historical figures and how films interpret history. I think the danger of this film is because it is set in this language, and it sort of appears that it's very accurate, and there's some things in here that are incredibly like inaccurate that I was able to research after seeing this film. I was like, I want to go visit Mexico. I want to learn about these cultures. So it did start that journey in me, but basically, like, they were doing a lot of combinations between Aztecs and Mayans, which existed hundreds of years apart in terms of the peak of their civilizations. The beginning of the film, where there's in the jungle, they were never that primitive. It was almost seeming like they were hunter-gatherers, but that civilization, they were farmers. They were very good farmers. They cleared the land, had giant crops, and it would just looked like a normal farm, right? But in the movie, it makes it look like it's they're just hunter-gatherers. And then with the brutal and sadistic sacrifice scenes that they showed in this movie, the Mayans did some of that, but not a lot. Yes, the Aztecs did some more of it in terms of human sacrifice, but the scale at which the movie implies, like hundreds of bodies that there's a scene where he falls into this pit and there's like literally hundreds of decapitated bodies. That had never happened. Not even the Aztecs were that brutal at all in terms of the level of and the scale of the sacrifice and the bloodlust that they were trying to portray the civilization as having, or at least the city dwellers, right? It was this interesting kind of dichotomy. The city is this place of sin, and nice in the countryside there are all these like, nice Mayans who are just cool. They're just trying to hang out, but in the city there's the evil sin. And then you kind of get the biggest thing that, the more I see this movie, the more it kind of bothers me, is the moralizing of it. They start the whole movie with a quote about like civilizations are destroyed from within. And what Mel's really trying to say is, I'll just use these words because I think this is what he's thinking. These savage, primitive cultures have so much violence that they kind of deserved what they got, and they deserve to fall. And it wasn't because of, smallpox, which was brought over from the Europeans, not intentionally, but it was. And that killed 90% of all the people in the Americas. 90% were killed because of diseases, not because of anything that the natives are doing to each other. Though there are some theories, because the Mayans civilization did collapse, that it was based on climate change. But Mel is really trying to make this point that no, it was the evil and the moral decay of the civilization. And that really rubs me the wrong way. Every time I see this movie, that gets worse and worse, especially the end where they have a scene where the Europeans show up on a beach, which again is hundreds of years too early from when they actually would have shown up there. And they even show they zoom in on a preacher holding up a cross, almost like they're making a religious message that these are the good Christians coming, and this civilization that was not Christian is collapsing because they're so bad, because they weren't Christian, and the Christians are now coming to save. And, Mel is a devout Christian and puts a lot of that into his films. And that really does rub me the wrong way, because that not an accurate depiction of the civilization. They weren't this brutal. They were not savages like this. They did not collapse because of any wrongdoing on their own. It was probably climate change. And the Europeans didn't even show up till hundreds of years after the Mayan civilization was at its peak. And even implying that smallpox was there to begin with. There's a scene when one of the girls, they run across a young child and a dead, like probably her father or something, who clearly has smallpox. Like, it's very clearly smallpox. And she says some statement like, "Oh, you guys, you're cursed, you're bad. This is all the thing that you're bringing this onto the world." Again, kind of blaming this civilization for its own collapse, which feels like moralizing. That stuff I dislike. So I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with this movie, to be honest. I enjoy it from a visceral level, and I still really want to go to the Yucatan and see those ruins. I'm jealous that you've done that already. But the other pieces that Mel puts in here, and his over-the-top sadistic gore, which is what he seems to like too, is unnecessary for what this is.
Unnecessary. That's really great to hear. I mean, not great, but helpful to hear, because I didn't know. And you're right. Like, that's the danger, right? Because like we said in our last episode, for very famous people, movies are not meant to be documentaries. And if you want to learn more, there's a lot available. But for, cultures like these that are not so talked about anyway, if this is the only thing that you're going to watch to understand and learn more about this culture, then that's going to shape what you think and how you feel. And that's kind of dangerous, even though I do think every filmmaker can put their own spin and have their interpretation for sure, but it gets dicey and dangerous in a context like this. And even though I didn't know about this, I was like, yeah, he's like really reveling in this whole bloodlust gore. There's no need for that, really. We get it. Even if this were true, I was like, yeah, I got it 30 minutes ago that this is pretty brutal. We don't have to beat that, over the head again and again.
Right. But that was the message. He had to show it's brutal because they had to get wiped out because they were brutal, is sort of the message that I think he was trying to get at there. So, I mean, that being said, though, it did inspire me to learn all this. Like, I did this all on my own after I saw this movie. I went online and looked up these cultures and read a little bit more about it and realized how inaccurate it was. But it did inspire me to take that step. And now, again, I want to go there. But I think to the vast majority of audiences who might see this, which was actually a pretty big commercial hit, especially for being an R-rated subtitled movie. If you just kind of casually go in this on a Saturday afternoon, get your popcorn, watch the film, you might leave in thinking, damn, those Mayans were really kind of bad news. Thank God that they got wiped out. That's the danger, I think, Totally. I still recommend seeing the film. I enjoy it, and I can't wait to go to Mexico. You'll have to give me some tips after the podcast of which pyramids to go to. Okay, so leaving the pyramids of Mexico, where are we heading to next, Karan?
Oh boy, we are going to a very different world. So my next movie that's shaped by travel list is A Room with a View from 1985, directed by James Ivory, starring Maggie Smith, Helena Bonham Carter, Judi Dench, Daniel Day-Lewis, a brilliant cast. Quick logline: Lucy Honeychurch shares a brief romance with George Emerson in Florence. Yet as she tries to move on with her life and look for marriage elsewhere, can she truly forget the events of that summer? We talked about with Eat, Pray, and Love of kind of your journey of finding yourself and self-reflection and such. And I should have mentioned, actually, in the Eat, Pray, Love section, I watched that movie when I was kind of going through a semi-breakup. So there's a reason why that movie has kind of held with me. Versus this one movie, Room with a View, to me is all about getting lost in what these epic historic places have to offer. The little interactions that you have, the pettiness of travel. Am I going to get the right room or no? You meet people who are annoying, but they also can enlighten you. And ultimately, through all of that just sort of feels day-to-day pettiness of travel, you end up coming away with something deeper about who you are, but also who should you be with, And like all James Ivory or Merchant Ivory movies, of course, it's about class and manners because they are usually set in this world of, English life. But I think this movie secretly is a romance, and it's sort of a finding who you are kind of movie, which I really love. So, but yeah, curious if you had watched this movie before.
I have not seen this film before.
Mm.
I'd been to Florence, which is where the
Mm-hmm.
film starts, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming just English countryside, which I've
Right.
driven through, but never actually spent, sort of the time that they do in this. Yeah, I had sort of an idea of. I haven't seen a lot of Merchant Ivory films. I know that they're one of your favorite producing
Right.
director combos. And in my head, I always imagined this being like a sort of a slow sort of drama. And it really actually felt to me a lot like a romantic comedy. And in a
Oh yeah.
way, a lot of this style, I think, was taken in the 90s and kind of dialed up and then given sort of like the romantic comedy style that we've seen over the, since the 90s in terms of what that was doing in the genre. I thought that was actually kind of really surprising. I was not anticipating that aspect of this being such a light sort of fun, even though it deals with serious things, right?
Yeah.
Unrequited love, all the manner stuff that you mentioned, but it is a very light and fun film, which is sort of how the words I would use to describe it.
I'm glad to hear. And that's, I think, the genius of Merchant Ivory Productions, because from the outside, it can feel like this is going to be slow and stodgy, but
Right.
it's always effortless. It's always sumptuous. It's a breeze, but then it leaves you with something deeper to think about, which is sort of, they just nailed that always. I should have mentioned that from a place standpoint, it's English countryside that, I mean, I've been to Italy. I've not been to Florence. I would love to go there. It looks amazing.
It's incredible. Yeah, absolutely incredible. Yeah.
But what I put this movie on the list for was the English countryside. And this, I think, goes back to me and my family, and now my boyfriend's love of watching, English countryside set murder mysteries and dramas and what have you, which I've always had a sweet spot for that. There's something, I don't know, very beautiful to me about these cottages and all of that life. For a little bit would be
Oh
incredible. But yeah, I agree. Like, it is a romantic comedy, especially Daniel Day-Lewis's character.
Oh my God.
What a performance, and what an amazing character he plays in this movie.
He is so annoying in a way where, like, I still honestly can't tell if he did a terrible job in this film or if he was trying to act completely. He was like the whole movie, to me, it felt like he was trying very hard to act. And I either that was,
That's the
again,
point.
His character is doing that to try to put on some airs, or Daniel Day-Lewis just wasn't good at that point. I was, which probably isn't the case because he's one of the best actors, but I was kind of like struggling with his performance. I had no idea he was in this movie. But your point on the English countryside, I think they did a very good job of it looking very full of life. Like in most of the scenes with the sound design, you could always hear birds chirping, wind blowing, even if they're inside because all the windows were open because there was no AC at that point. And it really made you feel like you were there. Nice sort of rolling hills and the greenery. It really was like something, oh yeah, because like that'd be kind of fun maybe to hang out in an English countryside or go to a pond and run around naked for 7 minutes in a movie for some reason.
I know.
The amount of scrotum in this movie was definitely very surprising. I was like, okay, I get it. Like they're nude and they're running around and they just keep going with this. And I was like, what are they trying to say here? But it looked fun. I'm not a big fan of ponds. I find them kind of dirty. So I don't know if I would have jumped in that and like swallowed some of that water, but maybe back then before pollution, it was fine. But I thought that scene was pretty funny.
Yeah. I mean, there's all of that, like you said, but I think what they're trying to say is sort of this contrast, right, between the free-spirited kind of instinctual, emotional way, the way George Emerson's character is, and him and his father, they're almost sort of ridiculed in the movie, not just because of different class, but also because they're kind of bohemian and artsy. They think on the fly. They don't fall into the usual structures of society. And I think it's very intentional that you literally have him and the other people running around naked while Cecil, the mother, and Lucy Honeychurch show up in white.
That was really
clothing.
Funny. Yeah, again, romantic comedy. I'm like, oh, this is like
romantic comedy, but very purposeful,
kind
of showing that, the disparity and the contrast between these two worlds. And they kind of say that in the movie about Helena Bonham's character, that even though she puts on this persona that she is from this kind of more cultured, hierarchical world, upper class, on the inside, she is this sort of passionate, more free kind of person. And that comes out in her music, the way she plays the piano and all of that. So there's a lot of these subtle touches. And like I said, it's just a classic thing. You can read into all of that or not, and you can still have a good time.
Right. That's what makes a good movie. Like the themes are there. You can pay attention to them to make it enhanced. But on a surface level, it just felt like a breezy, fun again, if it was set in the present day instead of back in Edwardian England, this could have been a movie that came out in like 94 with like Meg Ryan and,
It's so contemporary.
Hugh Grant. Yeah, it really was. And that was what surprised me, because in my head, I'm like, oh, Room with a View. Like, I think I know what this is going to be. When I went into it, I was like, oh, wow, it's not. Though one other thing I'll say that I thought was funny, the movie's titled A Room with a View. And in the very opening scene, the women kind of get to this hotel in Florence and they open the window and like, this view sucks. I'm like, it's fine. What are you complaining about? Just don't be so annoying. But then when they go to the actual room with the view and they open it up, I'm like, oh my God, that is a view. Okay, you were right to complain if this is the room you get with the upgrade. And that view is amazing. And Florence, again, is one of the most magical cities I've ever been to. And it just in that window frame captures like the amazingness of what Florence is. And I think that was really fun. I'm like, come on, guys. Like, that view's not that bad. You're seeing the street, you're in Florence, like, stop complaining. And then you see the other view, it's like, oh my God, that I want that room too,
Yeah, I want to go to all of those places. But even there's like kind of double layered meaning, right? Like room with a view, literally, of course, but also room with a view to a different life,
right?
A different, lens into who you are. So all of that stuff is at play, which is why, this is one of my kind of comfort films as well. I mean, all of Merchant Navy movies are, but this is definitely on the list because of all of that.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about it as like a room with a view means you kind of can look out and explore the world instead of this social society that she was coming from, where you don't open the windows, you don't go outside, you're just thinking about yourself. You're stuck in a room with no windows, a room with closed windows, right? And she wants a view in her life, and that is what she eventually finds, I think, in the end of the film. But the view is also awesome. Like, on a literal level and a thematic level, I'm like, okay, I want that. I'm sure that actually exists. I bet you could go to that house. Because they filmed it in. I looked this up afterward just to be like, because it looked all like they filmed it there. It was all filmed in Florence and like shut down the square and everything. And I'm like, wow, like that must have been tough to do from a permit standpoint. But you needed to be there. You have to be in the actual place. You
have to be. And this, again, is the genius of Merchant Navy Productions, because these are not expensive, big budget movies, but somehow Ismail Merchant, the producer, would sort of finagle his way in getting all these permits and getting these big stars. And they would do decently well financially because they were made really cheaply, but they look very expensive movies.
They do. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say was that it'll be so hard to make this list that we are making of current movies because they don't go anywhere. A common theme of all of our lists, movies on our list, that they went to the actual places, which is critical for this list, as I keep harping on over and over again in my episode.
That's definitely true. Nowadays I'll just go to a soundstage in Atlanta and throw a green screen up, and it's like, oh, this is now you're in Florence, you're in Miami. But no, it does make a difference. That's actually a really good point. And all these places we've talked about so far, and I think might be coming up in our last two, were filmed on location, and how important that is to inspire you to go places. I don't want to go to a green screen. I don't want to go to the metaverse.
You're speaking my language. I've converted you. Okay, what is your number one?
So my number one film on my travel wish list is a James Bond film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And this is a film that came out in 1969, directed by Peter Hunt, starring George Lazenby in his only Bond performance, and co-starring Diana Rigg and Telly Savalas. And the plot summary of this film is James Bond woos a mob boss's daughter and goes undercover to uncover the true reason for Blofeld's allergy research in the Swiss Alps involving beautiful women from around the world. For me, this movie... Well, first of all, I felt like I had to put a Bond movie on here somehow because that is such a travelogue of a series, especially back in the old days. That really was why people liked to watch these films, because they would go to places that, normal folks wouldn't be able to travel to. But for me, what this represents is a reason why movies inspire me to travel somewhere is because I want to travel to the set of where the movie was shot. Speaking of actually what we were just talking about, there's been so many places. If I go somewhere, even a city like New York or London, I'll look up, okay, what movies do I love? Where were they actually filmed? On this street corner? Oh, I go to the 9 3/4 train station for Harry Potter, and I go to that location. Or in New York, I go to the specific part where they filmed, a fight scene in The Godfather, because I like to go to the actual places that the movies were filmed. I think I actually mentioned on a previous podcast, we talked about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I was in Venice, Italy for the first time, but instead of exploring anything about Italy, I was just trying to find the church that they had in that film. I was a little high school kid at that point, so I was kind of dumb just doing that instead of taking in Venice. But for this movie, the Piz Gloria set, which is Stavro Blofeld's hideaway, in real life, it's a circular restaurant on the top of the Swiss Alps. And the way that they shoot this movie actually is one of the most beautiful Bond movies. I really, really want to go to this place in Switzerland just so I can go to Blofeld's lair and walk around where they actually filmed this film. So that's why I had to put a movie on the list that inspires me to go someplace, because the movie was shot there and I can visit the actual set. So, yeah, first off, have you been to Piz Gloria? I mean, I know you've been to Switzerland, which I've been to as well, but I haven't been to this exact location. Perchance, have you been there, and had you seen this film before? No. And what are your thoughts on the film?
Yeah, I had not been to this place, although I have been to the Alps and Lucerne. There's like a kind of Mount Titlis or Pilatus, that two mounts that I've been to, and they were these kind of revolving restaurants with like glass and such. And I was like a teenager, so I don't remember much, but I still remember being in total awe and had a great time and all of that. So, but yeah, I had watched this movie before. This is, I mean, you're the one who actually pointed me to this movie, and I think this is in my top 5 Bond movies. It's
for me
amazing.
Too. Yeah,
it's just so well done from head to toe. I think he's great as a Bond, and I know there's sort of backstory of why this didn't quite work out, but I think he, not to get ahead of ourselves, kind of marries the Sean Connery and Daniel Craig personas the best, where he has sort of that suaveness and cheekiness, but he feels like a real person, and the way Daniel Craig does. So, but yeah, the movie is super fun too. The whole, like, the storyline, it's fun, but it also has some relevance to it with COVID times and such that we're living in, and biochemicals and all of this stuff. Like, watching this again, I was like, oh, this feels eerily sort of even more relevant now. But it's also hilarious and campy in the best possible way, the way, most Bond movies are, especially from that era. Right. I mean, the fact that you have all these beautiful girls from all over, and they have allergies of foods of their native countries.
It's so funny.
It's just hilarious. And I mean, I'm just going to say this because it just makes me laugh, even though it's kind of despicable.
Yeah.
The one girl who's, I don't know from which African country she's from, the only thing she eats are 2 bananas.
Yeah, I know.
So bad. And I was like, no, don't do that to her.
Yeah, very 1969. Yeah, that would not fly today.
No.
For me too, this is one of my, I think even number 5 on my Bond ranking.
Yeah.
I think the tone is great. It's like serious, but then at the same time has some fun to it, but the stakes feel very real. And like I was mentioning before too, just the way this movie is shot is just gorgeous. And there's a end scene when I love Bond movies where at the end the Marines storm the lair, and the lair is this revolving restaurant, Piz Gloria, at the top of this mountain. And all these helicopters are coming in as like the sun is setting, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I'm not actually sure who the DP was, but that scene is great. And there's a bunch of action sequences where Bond's on skis, and these amazing wide shots, and the movie's in CinemaScope. It really takes advantage of that wide canvas. It's just incredible. And also Diana Rigg as Tracy is one of my favorite Bond girls, maybe even the best. She's super hot in this movie. She's a whole character. She has her own kind of journey to go on, though. The plot is like basically James Bond marrying her to calm her down. So there are some sort of gender problematic things in this.
The father says are unbelievable.
Yeah, it's
unbelievable.
And I think all the things that we're talking about in terms of them being so no longer kind of socially accepted anymore are because this movie, more so than a lot of the other old Bond movies, are really stick to the Ian Fleming novels. And those novels are incredibly sexist, racist, all those things. And this movie stays very close to what Fleming had in mind for the story, actually more so than most of the other Bond movies. And I think that's also why this movie works so well. It's just incredible. And just to mention one more thing about the location. So when they were scouting for locations, this restaurant was actually being built. In the book, Blofeld had a lair called Piz Gloria that was in the Swiss Alps. And they're like, hey, we'll pay for you guys to finish this restaurant if you let us shoot in it for a couple weeks for this film. And they let them do it. They paid for the completion of the restaurant. And now that restaurant and that complex is called Piz Gloria after the Fleming novel, just because the Bond production paid for it. And apparently there's a whole museum to Bond underneath the restaurant. Oh, wow. You can go to and see photos and props and all these things. And again, that's a reason why I just really, really want to go here.
That sounds so cool.
It's so cool. I mean, getting back to the point we made before, this is an actual location. This is not a set. They went to a real place, even though they paid to finish it. It wasn't ready at the time, but it's a real place and you can go there. And that is something that I find super cool. And then a lot of movies today, they just don't have that because they're all on green screens.
No, I didn't know that. That's incredible. I would love to go there even more. I will say though, as somebody who has spent some time in Switzerland, because I had family there, I wish we got to see a little more of Switzerland, because they are primarily in this location,
in that layer,
which is all you see is sort of, ice and snow, and that's sort of it. I was happy when they came down and there was like a fair or like a market or something. That was sort of fun to see, because I'm always like that. I want to see more of the place. If you're taking me there, show me more. Just don't sit in one place. The chases are really fun, but after a while, I was like, we've had too many of these set pieces. That's my one other nitpick, other than sort of the problematic things we already touched on.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it is a little long. I mean, that's one thing that I think you can say about it, but it just still keeps my interest the whole time.
It's still very fun.
Yeah. One other thing, just the last note on it too. I just want to call out the score. I think might be one of the best Bond scores that there existed. I listen to it all the time. I think they did a really great job with the score too.
Yeah. I totally agree. It's too bad that George Lazenby didn't sort of carry forward, because I thought he was just so great as Bond.
Yeah, and I think they could have done some very interesting things, especially with spoiler at the end that James Bond's wife gets killed at the very end of the movie, and in the books that's a driving motivation for him over the next couple novels, and they kind of deal with it in the movies, like they mention it in the next couple Connery and Roger Moore films, but it's not really touched on. I think they could have done a lot with that, and they would have, I think, with Lazenby and that tone that they're really striking with this movie. It would have been, to your point, a lot akin to the Craig films, which actually the final Daniel Craig film, No Time to Die, is heavily inspired by this movie. Uses elements of the score, uses the famous line, "We've got all the time in the world," which is an incredible line in this film. They use it in a different way in the No Time to Die film. So they were kind of paying homage to this film.
Plots with the chemical, biochemical stuff. Like it's,
They use the same car, actually. They pull out the same car that Lazenby had in it. So I think they did a lot of fun allusions to this film, which is why I like No Time to Die a lot as well. Yeah, I think it would have been interesting to see if Lazenby had continued in the franchise. Oh, well, another universe. Okay, so we finished up my travel wish list in Switzerland. So where's our final destination today, Karan? Where are we going?
All right, so my number one film that shaped my travel list is Out of Africa, 1985, directed by Sidney Pollack, starring Meryl Streep, Robert Redford, and Klaus Maria Brandauer. Quick logline: in the 20th century, colonial Kenya, a Danish baroness plantation owner has a passionate love affair with a free-spirited big game hunter. That's part of the movie, but really this is about Karen Blixen sort of moving to Africa just to find a different life with this sort of childhood friend, actually the brother of the guy that she's dating in Denmark. And it's a marriage of convenience, basically, to kind of get to a different world and start a new life. And then through this process, she ends up, building a home in this place, even though that marriage sort of totally dissolves, nothing really much comes out of it.
Right.
And then in the movie, there is this character played by Robert Redford, who's sort of this fleeting person who is the love of her life, presumably, but they never sort of really get together in the classical sense. So it is it's a romance of the romance novels, really. But I think it happened in real life, because this movie is based on a true story, I think.
Right. It is. Yeah. It's an autobiography.
Yeah. So this is my number one movie, because I think the thing that I seek for the most when I travel is adventure, and adventure not in sort of the classical sense that, I'm going to go through, river rafting or jumping off, a mountain peak or something, although that could be a part of it, but really more about adventure in the sense that I'm put in a culture that I know the least about, with people that I have least familiarity with, and how that culture challenges me, maybe even pushes me, and ultimately you take away and you give some of yourself to that place as well. And that's, to me, is the happiest travel experience. So I think this movie kind of embodies that. And then secondly, Africa, I've never really been there, you know. I've been to North Africa, Egypt, which doesn't, I don't know if that counts, but I've never really been to Africa. And the first time I watched this movie, I was like, there's this whole beautiful, epic place, which this movie captures so stunningly. And the fact that we know so little about it in the Western culture, it's not written about the way Europe is written about. And of course, there's a lot more to the continent, and every country has its own culture, its own things. But I don't know, this movie really made me want to go there. There's no other place that I want to go more to than Africa. And of course, the different countries, maybe start with South Africa and sort of make my way up or something. But yeah, this movie really made me think of that. But yeah, have you been to Africa, and had you watched this movie before?
So I've been to no part of Africa, not even North Africa. I have always wanted to go for sure, and this movie definitely hit those desires right head on. And this is an episode where, yeah, I can say you completed a hat trick and gave me 3 movies I've never seen. So this had been on my list for a long time, simply just because it was a Best Picture winner, and I had avoided it because I heard very bad things about it, of that being long, slow, and boring. I definitely feel that it was the first two. It was long and slow, but surprisingly, it wasn't boring. I kept waiting, honestly, in the movie to get bored. And I don't really even know why I wasn't bored, because it wasn't like it was very interesting. The performances were fine. The scenery was incredible, other than some very poorly placed rear screen projection, kind of getting back to what we were talking about in the earlier, where these Robert Redford and Meryl Streep are clearly sitting in an airplane in front of a blue screen. Yeah. I don't think that was necessary, because then you cut to these shots of this plane. I mean, that was a highlight of the movie to me.
Yeah.
Sequence when Robert Redford is taking her around in an airplane, this biplane.
Amazing.
And just the shots are epic. The scenery is incredible.
The
score is great. Another John Barry, much like the previous film was also John Barry score. I think he actually won the Oscar for this one, I think. But just incredible. And to your point too, these are all real locations that they filmed on in the 80s. They didn't do any other than the weird rear screen projection. It felt like it was an IMAX National Geographic documentary during those sequences. And it really just like pulled you into I just want to go there and experience this. It's like nothing else that I've ever seen. So I was very enthralled in those sections. But yeah, for some reason I wasn't bored, even though I kept telling myself I should be bored right now, because I'm not connecting with anything that's kind of going on. But I wasn't bored. It was a weird experience, but I'm definitely glad I saw the film, and definitely can see why this would be your Africa movie for sure. I had another movie that didn't make the list that was Africa for me, but if I had seen this one, it would have been this. I mean, these shots of the scenery are just incredible.
Yeah. No, I avoided this movie too for a long time, and I think I watched it a few years ago the first time. It was because of that reputation. I was
not even the Meryl thing could get you over that, huh? I thought you would have seen this just because you're like, oh, Meryl,
Yeah, I just was like, oh, this just seems too long and what have you. And then when I watched it, I was sort of blown away. And I think that's sort of what the genius of the movie is, that yes, it's the cinematography and the beautiful landscape and everything that intrigues you and pulls you in, but you really are in her mind and in her story, which I think is quite captivating. Like her arc is pretty amazing. That this is a person, going back to Liz Gilbert in Eat, Pray, Love, who's sort of directionless and maybe even a little bit selfish in the beginning, is not super kind, maybe even judgmental and a little bit uppity. And you really see her kind of journey throughout the entire movie, where that whole scene, when the way they kind of cross the whole desert and the forest for her to go and meet her husband, because the husband is on the front line, and she shows up there, in a time where, I mean, let alone even most men, but definitely not women out there on such a journey, with her hair all over the place and covered up in dirt and mud. They've gone through attacks with animals and all sorts of things. Like, you're really put in place in that sense of adventure, and somebody who's been put in circumstances that are just way beyond them. Yeah. And I think that, to me, that's the part that really pulls you in, is sort of her arc. And then the romance too. Like, you're sort of rooting for this couple, that something might come off it, but not much happens. But I don't know. I watched this movie now 2, 3 times, and there's something very intriguing about that because
Yeah.
she is the kind of person who can, I think, foresee where this goes. She knows that there's no way that they could actually make it.
Right.
So she's very practical in that sense. So I don't know. This movie is one of those movies that kind of washes over you and then stays with you after you watched it, and all these different elements come together.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would describe it the same way. And maybe it is just some of the parts are greater
Yeah.
than the whole kind of situation because I can't pick one thing that I'm like, oh, this works so well for me. That's other than that flight sequence. That's why I would go watch this again. And I kept again waiting to be bored with this, but I wasn't. So something was working in there. And I think again, it was all the elements, like you said, kind of coming together. I thought she did an incredible job, honestly. Like
Yeah.
Meryl Streep, like totally lost in that part. Another great accent that she's got going in there. Robert Redford was fine. I mean, he was kind of just playing himself as the reluctant
Basically.
American, like, oh, colonialism's bad, but I'm here anyway. You know, he
Right.
has some line about like, oh, we're not owners, we're just passing through. But yet you're participating in the colonialism. So it's
Right.
like, okay, whatever, you're kind of conflicted. And you know, that part of it too was definitely kind of the movie had a point of view of the colonists. Like she definitely was separated from the natives. There wasn't any kind of empathy there. There were a lot of things there. Just, hey, this is colonialism. This is what it was. This is what they did to these populations. But because it is so grounded in her story and it's through her lens,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it bothered me because I don't believe in or want to support in any way colonialism, and it just is something that it makes me very upset. But it's the time and the place, and it's through her eyes, and it just that was
Right.
her experience. So it wasn't something where I felt judging the character, even though again I think it's a deplorable situation that the Europeans are
Yeah.
doing in Africa. But yeah, I don't know. It's some of the whole. I guess it just I can't explain why it wasn't boring. I guess that's the best way to put that on the poster. This isn't boring, even though it should be, but it wasn't. And I don't really know why. But I'd watch it again. Like oddly, it's weird. I can't really
Yeah.
explain it.
I would rate it much higher than that because that makes it sound like that it's it's just but it's not. I think, and it's a bit of a time capsule movie of that time when they were making
The
these
mid
big
80s.
epic movies, the mid 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that's another reason why this and the English Patient, they all kind of get
Mm.
this sort of stodgy sort of feeling to it. But the truth is that from today's lens, you go back and watch these movies, they are epic, deservedly so, because they are
Mm-hmm.
made on that giant scale and they're kind of amazing. I now I'm almost like why we should not be looking upon these movies from in my books at least.
Yeah, there was a period in that 80s and a little bit in the
Yeah.
90s too, where it was like, I don't want to say this this isn't in a negative way, but like knock off David Lean. They're like, how can we make Lawrence of Arabia and just put it
Right.
in a different place? There was Reds, which got all that Academy praise, English
Mhm.
Patient, this film. It was all just like Lean knockoffs, which that doesn't mean that they're bad, but they were trying to do what Lean is he's the master of that. I mean, his epics are like untouchable in my
Yeah.
opinion in terms of their quality. But this wasn't it wasn't bad. I guess that I was going into this thinking I was gonna fall asleep, get bored, but I never did, and it didn't seem long, even though it's a long movie. It's I don't know, maybe that's Africa too. I don't know, but I definitely would love to go to the places in this film that she went into, and yeah, maybe Robert Redford can fly me around in a plane. I'd be up for that.
That's pretty good. Exactly. And the other thing also that during that time, there's the kind of changing of the guard, right? Like all these new hotshot filmmakers with fast cutting, new ways of telling stories all coming up. So these movies sort of look like from a different time.
Mhm.
So it's sort of that moment versus now, if you look back at it, we don't make these kind of movies at all.
No. Yeah.
So it just, I miss these kind of movies, to be honest.
Me too. Yeah, the big historical epic set in
Yeah.
a place, get lost in whatever the location is, telling a true story. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
definitely a genre that I really like too, and it's not something that there's a film, The Woman King, that came out last year that I really liked. That was kind of hitting that scratching that itch for me. That if you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend that film.
All right, that's our list. What didn't make your list?
So a couple films didn't make my list. So I mentioned an Africa film. So The Ghost in the Darkness was Africa. I had another Miami film on there, Michael Mann's Miami Vice. In-Betweeners 2, which is Australia, a place I've never been. The Edge, a thriller that was set in Alaska, another place that I have not been. And then Alexander, Oliver Stone's biopic, which, similar to Apocalypto, had a scene set in ancient Babylon. And I've definitely always wanted to go to Iraq and see those ruins. What about yourself?
So I had Vicky Cristina Barcelona for Spain in general. Never been, always wanted to go. The Handmaiden, Korea, but also parts of Japan. I have been to Japan, but not South Korea. Lost City of Z, which is basically Chile and I want to say northern South America, I think, Nebraska, and then The Proposal for Alaska.
Oh, to Alaska. Well, maybe we should plan a trip to Alaska at the end of this recording. So, what are we talking about in our next episode?
Yeah, so I guess we are flying all the way back home, which is to the US. We are going to be talking about movies that shaped our view of America. So it's July 4th that's coming up. So we're going to talk about the movies that have shaped our view of this great nation.
Yeah, and this is a part 2 of an episode we did last year. So for this episode, you can go back and listen to our first views of America before we drop the part 2 on you.
We hope you've enjoyed this discussion and maybe these lists have inspired you to travel more or also think about places that you want to travel. Just to remind our listeners, we are available on all the podcast platforms, including YouTube, where you can find all of our reviews. As always, we encourage you all to please rate and review because that really helps us getting noticed. Keep doing that. With that, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, safe travels, Karan.
He had a lot of guts.